One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm. Fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battleborn Progress. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
Everyone to Out in Front with Annette. My name is Annette Magnus, and I am once again in Carson City, out in front of the legislative building where Out in Front began. So I am live, like I said, from Carson City. We've been inside the building all day today. My team and I got to Carson City yesterday with many of our progressive partners. And we are here for redistricting. We are going to be explaining all things redistricting to you. We will be here every day. We will be out in front every day, all through the legislative session, giving you the most up-to-date information on what's going on with the special session. So thank you for joining us. Join us every evening. We're going to be here. We'll be on Facebook. We'll be on Twitter explaining the latest and greatest. You know, yesterday I was deemed the worst person in Nevada. And so I really want to lean into that. As the worst person in Nevada, I am here to hold our legislators accountable and make sure that your voices are heard. So if that's what being the worst person means, then I'm here for it. So I have some very special guests tonight who are going to explain the redistricting process to you, what it's going to look like as we think it might look like, and how you can be involved with the redistricting process. It's kind of a nebulous, kind of esoteric system that happens every 10 years. And we really want to break it down for our viewers, explain to our viewers what it means, how you can be involved, and why you should care. So our first guest is going to be my dear friend, Emily Zamora from Silver State Voices. So Emily, come on in, join us. Welcome. It's so good to have you again here. So Emily, tell us about redistricting. You're up here with me in Carson City. What does redistricting mean? And how has Silver State Voices been involved in working on this process? And why should people at home care?
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well on this Friday evening. It's so great to be here with the worst person in Nevada. I don't know, those people must be crazy because I think she's one of the best, but you know what, to each their own. But I'm the executive director of Silver State Voices, and we are a 501c3 civic engagement table of a diverse group of organizations that are conducting civic engagement work in their communities each and every day. And so census and redistricting have been two issues that are near and dear to our heart, because we believe underrepresented communities should be at the forefront of our democracy. And census and redistricting are two issues that the everyday person is not thinking about, but they really affect our day-to-day lives. In 2020, many of you all may have filled out your census maybe for the first time, or maybe you filled it out for the third time. But the census really is, for the US Constitution, we have to have an accurate count of every single state every 10 years. And so we just went through that process. It was a little bit delayed because of COVID-19. But after the census is done, the Census Bureau releases the data on each particular state, all the cities, municipalities, and we have an accurate number of who is living everywhere and what type of people, so on and so forth. And so each state has a responsibility to go through their own redistricting process. In the state of Nevada, our process is by going through the Nevada State Legislature. And that's what this conversation is mostly going to be about. There are different redistricting processes, such as on the county level, city municipalities, such as like City of Sparks, City of North Las Vegas, and school districts as well. But in the state of Nevada, the Nevada legislature is responsible for doing redistricting for the Nevada Assembly, the Nevada State Senate, Nevada congressional districts, our 4 congressional districts, and for the Nevada Board of Regents. And so today we're in a special legislative session to address these issues. Normally, if we were not living in the times of COVID, we would have addressed this during the regular 81st session, but the census data was not delayed, and that's why the governor had to call a special emergency session to address this.
And we knew this was coming. This was something we knew during regular session. They were not going to be able to address this, and we had to do this in a special session. We kind of all knew it was going to be around November. So it was no secret that this was coming, and it was because it was delayed because of the Trump administration and because of COVID-19. So we knew this was coming. This was not a surprise.
And I think it's really important to point that out, right? Because we're a nonpartisan organization. We don't care about one political party over another. But this is not happening because, you know, one party is trying to take control or anything. It's just happening because of the circumstances, right? And we have to.
And it's a fairness issue. We got to make sure everybody's represented properly.
And it's mandated per our constitution. So,
So a lot of questions coming in, and just a reminder to folks at home, if you have questions, now's the time to ask. There are no dumb questions. We're still learning this process too. This is some of our first times doing this. And so we're learning as we go. So if you've got questions, we will do our best to answer them all throughout the time we're in Carson City. That's why we do Out in Front, is to help all of you. So our first question is from Teresa, one of our regular viewers. And she says, so what did they do today and what's next?
So today there was definitely, you know,
they started the proclamation,
all of that jazz, right? The Assembly and the Senate met, all of their regular
set the rules, all of that good stuff.
There were a couple of bills that came out already. There was the one about the rules, and then the biggest bill that came out today was Assembly Bill 1. And Assembly Bill 1 does 2 different things. It is one, the maps for the Nevada Board of Regents, right? And the Nevada Board of Regents, for viewers who may not be familiar, that's the institution that oversees higher education in the state of Nevada. And then it also has a provision in there about judicial races. Today, in the state of Nevada, judicial races have a different filing period. Technically, as of this moment, for the 2022 election, their filing period is January of 2022. And there's a lot of like FEC regulation reasons why that's the particular case. And
the FEC is the Federal Elections Commission.
Yes. And then, thank you for that. And then every other particular candidate, governor, state assembly, school board, all of that, their filing period is March 2022. But the problem that we have is that since we're in this special session and it takes some time for the elections department, when all of this is decided, for them to do all of the maps, there's no way that they're going to be able to handle all of this at the same time. And so many of the registrars in Nevada have really been vocal saying, we can't meet this deadline. It's already going to be a lot for our teams that are working around the clock tirelessly, and so we need an extension to make the judicial deadline the same as every other deadline. And so that's something that we testified in support of, and we think it's a simple fix, but it's going to help these people that are working, you know, around the clock on these things.
So I also want to add, during a special session, just to remind the viewers how a special session works. So there is a proclamation that comes out from our governor, Governor Steve Sisolak, And in that proclamation, there are bullet points as to what the legislature can work on.
Yes.
So this is not like during the regular session where they can just do anything they want willy-nilly, any bills. There are only specific issues that the legislature is deemed able to work on when he calls a special session. And only those things can be worked on. Nothing else can come up. So none of our other issues can come up. They are bound to only working on redistricting. That's it.
Yep.
So I also want to ask Emily, this is going to be a long process.
Yes.
Unclear on how many days this is going to go. We'll be here for the entire time. But, how do people follow along? Obviously, Nellis is a great resource, and we will put the link to Nellis in the chat for all of you, just to remind you. It haven't been in session for about 6 months, so we'll bump the Nellis LCB, Legislative Council Bureau website in the chat. We will also bump the bill from today in the chat, Assembly Bill 1, AB 1. But what's next? According to them, we're going back into a hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m. What do you think people need to be watching for? And how do we make sure we get the fairest maps possible? Because that's really what we're here for.
Yeah. So with the proposed maps, they are already on Nellis. There's a specific redistricting tool on the website, and we'll make sure that it's linked on here as well. But there's all of the proposed maps are on the website already. So the congressional, the state assembly, the state senate, all of those maps are on there. And so it's really important. You have the ability to go onto the website and comment on, what do you like this? Do you not like this? So on and so forth. You also have the ability to create your own maps and I'll upload them onto, you create
we just did. We're working on it right now. We got some good stuff for you coming tomorrow. So stay tuned.
Yeah. And so those are some simple things that you can do. And I would say, another simple thing is following us on Twitter. We have this coalition, Nevadans Count. It's a lot of organizations that are doing this great work in our communities every day.
And IPN, which is our C3 org. On the other side, we are a part of Nevadans Count. So we are working with Emily and her team in real time. So follow along with all of us.
Yeah. And so we're tweeting actively about what's happening, and I want to lean into this. One of the things that we're tweeting about right now is, our disappointment in the level of the congressional maps right now. They were released a couple of days ago. And when we're talking about the Latinx community, when we're looking at these maps, we're super disappointed. They are the fastest growing community of color in the state of Nevada. And right now, these maps have that community pretty much split in thirds. And it really makes it hard for that community to ever be able to elect the candidate of their choice.
So let's talk about that really quickly. Hang on, let me let the truck pass, since we're live. This is real. So let's talk about communities of interest.
Yes.
That is a really important term that is going to come into play during this whole process. Again, that is communities of interest. That is what you at home need to be listening for, looking for. It's a very, very important term that we're going to be talking about a lot this week. So we want to explain it. Explain what a community of interest is and why it's so important to a map making process like redistricting.
So communities of interest, you will also hear it very frequently as just COI abbreviated. And that's pretty much communities that have an interest all in common that want to be kept together. So for an example, we have the AAPI community in the state of Nevada is one of the fastest growing communities.
What does AAPI stand for?
Asian American Pacific Islander community. And for them, they've been very vocal for a long time that they would like to be kept as together as possible.
And in Southern Nevada, that really is kind of Chinatown area, Spring Valley area, over into the Southwest.
And Koreatown, which is nearby as well.
Exactly.
And not ensuring that they're split up into so many different districts, minimizing their ability to have actual representation. And when we say representation, it's not just like, let's elect somebody that looks like us. It's
you like to say not all skin folk or kin folk. Yeah,
I
that's
do
right.
say that. My husband and I say that very
A
often.
lot. Yes, you do.
But it's electing somebody that looks like us and also understands and has the values of our community and puts the issues of our community first. And so for many of these communities of interest, it's really important. This state is changing so much. After the census, we're the third most diverse state in the country, and these communities of interest really want to be able to have representation in buildings like this that don't just look like them, but have their past experiences in mind and have the experiences of their communities that they're representing in mind when they're casting their votes.
Well, and also understand the issues of those communities. Oftentimes people think about, oh, well, Latinos only care about immigration. Totally not true. Complete misconception. Latinos as a population care about all kinds of things, just like everyone else does.
Education, healthcare.
Yep. And so having somebody who actually represents those issues and understands those issues from that community's point of view.
It's so important. And I think that when you look at the maps of 2010 and you see how those were drawn out and you look at, the numbers of the census from 2020, we've grown so much. The Native American community has grown over 100% in comparison to 2010. The Black community has grown exponentially, and so has the Asian American Pacific Islander community and the Latinx community. And all of those communities deserve to be represented. But one thing that I think is really important is that there's been this narrative out there of putting different communities of color against each other. And I think that's not okay.
Or any community, frankly. We should not be pitting anyone against each other in this.
And it's not about one is more important than the other. It's really about all of us getting a piece of the puzzle and really
being represented. Yeah. So I got a question from a viewer who texted me. They said, what happens if a map is passed and if the Latino or any other community is split? What can be done if this split happens?
Well, if the map is passed, so once the maps are passed, that means that both the Assembly and the Senate have voted on them, and then they go to the governor's office, right? In that process, what can happen is that folks can petition the governor to say, veto these maps. They do not represent our community, and we think that there needs to be a change here. The governor can choose to veto it at that point. If he doesn't veto it and he does sign it, then there are entities that can sue, right? And I think that's always the last resort and the resort that we don't want to go to, because
we can get them right now and have a healthy debate and try and make the maps the best they can be. And we've done that at every level of government so far.
Literally.
And we've worked with Republicans and Democrats at every level of government to do that so far.
We had great success with the Clark County School District and working with both Democrats and Republicans there, and them actually agreeing.
Which was really something to behold.
Mind-boggling.
If you've watched the school board lately, it's kind of a hot mess. But we worked with all sides involved to try and get those maps to be better. And the map that was passed was actually really good.
Yeah. And so, that's the ultimate thing that can happen. But I would say that if you belong to the Latinx community and you're not happy about these maps, I think it's really critical that you call your legislator, write them, tell them how disappointed you are, that you believe that your community deserves more representation. And I think, submitting your potential own map, amplifying on social media, because this is not final. It has not been passed out of any house right now. And so there is definitely the opportunity to get our opinions across to folks and get them to make changes to the maps.
And before we even get to, petitioning the governor or going any other way, the process that needs to be followed right now is calling your legislators, your state legislators, your assembly person and your senator. If you don't know who that is, you can find it on the legislative website, Nellis. We can put that in the chat so you can find out who your legislators are. You need to call your assembly person, you need to call your senator and weigh in with them right now, especially on this map you're talking about. So I want to just come back to that again for a second and really explain, we're not advocating for one party over another here.
Nope.
We're nonpartisan in this. We just want to get the best representation for communities of interest right now.
Yeah.
Why is it that there is an issue with the Congressional District 1 map? Because there's a lot of rumors floating out there that are kind of nonsense. And I really want to explain to the viewers, what are the problems with that map? And be honest.
Oh my, there's so many rumors and problems. I will say that I think one of the biggest things that's an issue is that right now in CD1, there's about 42.2% of that district it identifies as Hispanic or Latinx or whichever term that you prefer to use. Right now, the proposed map is taking down that community to about 35%. That's a huge cut. And what that's also doing then is putting more Latinos in CD3 and CD4. But what that is pretty much doing is doing almost a third.
And it divides up the Latino community's power.
Yes.
And that is really what we're talking about here.
Yes.
When you divide up communities of interest, you divide up their power and make them less powerful, which is never something you want to do, because you want them to be able to advocate on the issues that matter to their communities. And if there's less of them to do that, they're less powerful. And that is a huge problem.
It is. And I mean, I think you said it perfectly, right? It's a huge problem because this is the largest POC group in the state of Nevada. And why are we taking their power away from them?
And you're Latina. You live in this district that we're talking about.
Yeah.
How, as a constituent, does this make you feel? And why is it aggravating to you? Because I can just see it on your face.
Yeah, it's aggravating to me. And I think it's even it frustrates even my mom. My mom is Latina as well. She is a longtime fan of Congresswoman Titus. And the proposed maps pretty much almost take my mom out of her district. And she wants somebody, Congresswoman Titus has served that district for a really long time. And she understands it's not about her political party, but she's been invested in that particular community. So I'm hearing it from the lens of my mother, who has lived in that district since 2001 and has seen it grow and grow and grow. And she wants somebody that understands the community to represent her, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. And I think that's a big problem when we're trying to take away somebody's ability that has a really great connection with their constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do people get involved right now? I just want to repeat this again. We're going to be out in front all week, explaining the process. If you all have questions, put them in the chat. We will answer any of your questions. Emily can come back on after our next guest if we need to, but how do people get involved right now, and why do we need them involved?
We need you to get involved because ultimately the people that pay the salaries of all of these 63 people that are representing are you all, the taxpayers. And so they need to hear your opinion. Whether you like the maps or you don't like the maps, it's our responsibility as Nevadans to tell them what's on our mind, because they're governing for all of us, not for just them or for lobbyists or special interests
or one party or another.
It's for all of us. And so we have that responsibility. I know there's a lot of things happening. We're still living in a pandemic. Brittany got freed today. And so many different things are happening. But this is actually something that's going to affect our life for 10 years.
And I think that's a really important point.
Yes.
This cannot be changed. Once it's done, this cannot be changed for 10 years. So now is the time. It's not like, oh, let's kick this can down the road. We can get to this later. There is no getting to this later. I need y'all to feel a sense of urgency right now, because it can't just be me and her in this building yelling at people like we normally do. Like, I need all of you to yell at them too.
Exactly. And so how you stay involved is going on to the Nevada Legislature page, make an account, go on,
track the bills.
Track the bills.
It's free.
Take a look at the maps that they're proposing, comment on them, go on social media, tweet about it, use the hashtag NBLedge, follow us on Nevadans Count, And if you need help, you want to testify, but you're just not sure, you know, hit us up, and we're more than happy to guide you through the process and give you any you know, any tips or anything like that. But ultimately, it's up to us Nevadans to make our voice heard.
And I really want to shout out our partner organizations. You know, we can't do this without our partner organizations. Yes. So following along with partner groups like Make the Road Nevada, following along with partner groups like Mi Familia Vota and Asian Community Development Council, ACDC, Make It Work Nevada, Plan, ACLU, Silver State Voices, Silver State Equality. All of our partners are up here working on your behalf.
Faith in Action Nevada.
Yeah, organizing behind the scenes, getting their people to speak up. And so following any of our accounts, following all of our accounts, getting involved with these organizations, because we're going to need every single one of your voices to get this done.
Yeah, and I got to give a little shout out as well to my team. My team's been working like around the clock. We have our census redistricting coordinator, Noe Orozco, who has been amazing and been doing so much work for many months. And
we're going to have Noe on this week. Don't you worry. He's the expert.
Yeah, that's been working with partners, you know, our democracy team, Matilda and Cesar, Fabiola, our data manager that's been really crunching the numbers, and Melody, my deputy. Collectively, this has been a team effort. And I think this is really important for us because usually the community has not had a voice in redistricting. It has really been an effort that has been guided by elected officials
and partisan people. And
yeah,
we're truly nonpartisan. We just want the best maps possible.
Exactly. And so we really came to this wanting to center the community and ensuring that the community has a voice in this process. So,
well, we're going to get into more nitty gritty. I've got all kinds of questions around percentages and, you know, all of the different terms being thrown around. We're going to explain all of those in just a few minutes. Emily, I'm going to have you back in a second, but one last question. If folks want to submit their own maps, which they can do, just go on the LCB website, the Legislative Council Bureau website under Nellis, and you can upload your own maps if you have ideas, and you should do that.
Yes.
And you should also call in and testify during these hearings. We'll be putting it up on our social, right?
We don't want to be the only ones testifying. You know, I think
we shouldn't be the only ones testifying. We need you to call in tomorrow, Sunday, Monday, however long this goes. And again, we'll ping you when that's time, but we need you to make your voices heard.
Yeah, it's day one, and I think they're probably already sick and tired of hearing about us.
They were sick of us before we got here. Let's be real.
But so that's why you need to use your voice, or submit, you know, call in, testify, tweet, upload a map.
And the link is in the chat for the Legislative Council Bureau website, the Nevada Legislative website. That is where you submit a map. They have a system in there where you can go in and play with the lines and play with the districts.
Yeah.
Don't be intimidated. You should be doing this. This is your process. This is for you.
Yes. And one thing something that my team says almost every day is that it's not only like, this is not a process just only for adults. Get your children involved.
Yeah, there was a teacher at the school district level who had her kids in her classroom do this.
Yeah.
And the kids were super into this. They're going to be voters one day. They should absolutely, by the time we do this again, your son will almost be voting age.
Almost. He's like a 1 year short. But if you have a second grader, right now, that second grader is going to be voting in 10 years on these new maps. So get your children involved in this process too.
It impacts them. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, Emily, I'm going to put you on the side over here, and I'm going to bring in my next guest, Holly Welbourne from the ACLU, also the board chair of Institute for Progressive Nevada, RC3, and one of my besties. Holly, welcome. Tell us what the ACLU has been working on redistricting. You've been very busy with this process, making sure this process is fair and nonpartisan. What does it look like for you all?
We're very focused on communities of interest as well, but on October 27th, the Interim Committee on Redistricting, they had a presentation from the Nevada Department of Corrections, who were reporting on the implementation of a bill that passed in 2019, AB 450.
Assembly Bill 450.
Yes, Assembly Bill 450, which ended the practice of what's called so-called prison gerrymandering. And what prison gerrymandering is when for census purposes, people who are incarcerated are counted in the community where the prison is located rather than in their home communities. So what's essentially happening is, it's distorting political power in these small communities by inflating population counts there, when really those individuals should be counted in the community where they have ties.
So where they came from, essentially.
Yes, where they came from, where they're likely to return. It's,
where they have family, where they have a home, maybe, all of those things.
Exactly. 11 states so far, including Nevada, have passed similar legislation to what we have here. A few other states have tried to resolve the issue, by matter of practice. But at that presentation, it was revealed that the Nevada Department of Corrections only compiled 50% of addresses to reallocate those individuals back to their home communities. It was outrageous. We were infuriated. We had placed public records requests a few times with the department to try to understand what processes they were using in order to reallocate those addresses and get them to the proper individuals, the state demographer who's in charge of reporting all of those numbers to the state legislature. So, we took action, and really what it amounts to is that not only have they violated AB 450, but it could put the entire redistricting and reapportionment process at risk, because the Nevada Constitution requires that redistricting and reapportionment be based on accurate data. The state legislature had said that we want these individuals reallocated in a particular way, and they failed to do that because more accurate data is available to the state.
They just didn't want to do the work.
They just didn't want to do the work. Luckily, we sent out a letter. We tried to get some movement on this, and unfortunately, the executive branch refused to let this go. And we did find out this morning that about 1,000 additional addresses, was more than that, more addresses than that were collected, but about 1,000 were actually reallocated and went through that, AB 450, they were compliant. What that does is it brings the numbers up to, from our perspective and looking at other states that have implemented similar legislation, it's about at the level that can be expected for the first go around. There have to be some changes in the law that really beef up how the data is collected, what the intake process is, what is considered an address, a residential
but all that
address.
those changes have to be done during regular session.
Yeah, that has to occur at a regular session. It's not going to be able to occur now. So, we're very pleased with the fact that the executive branch refused to let
and
it go.
let's be clear who the executive branch is. I think people don't always understand the branches. That's Governor Sisolak we're talking about, and his staff.
His staff worked really hard and got executive branch departments, including Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Motor Vehicles, to work around the clock to get this data submitted to the legislature. So, we'll see. There's an additional process. We have to make sure that it actually is utilized throughout the redistricting process. In certain circumstances, some things might need to shift around, but it's nothing that's going to significantly affect the maps that we're looking at today.
So, question on this, and this has been a long process that started in 2019 during that regular session and has kind of kept going since then to make sure it got implemented correctly, and you had to hold their feet to the fire to do this, specifically the Department of Corrections to hold their feet to the fire to do this. How did the areas where these prisons were located or are located, how did they react to these changes? Because it takes some of their power away, but it gives it to the communities where these folks actually will reside once they are not incarcerated anymore.
Yeah, I think, Pershing County, where Lovelock Correctional Center is located, the prison accounted for, I think it was like almost 10% of their population. That was the biggest drop that we saw. And so, we're talking about like really that should be like a county commission seat or something, that's kind of, the running joke right now that, it's a complete distortion of the actual population, people who actually vote for their representatives, so they're inflating that population count in a manner that the legislature has rejected. And the legislature has rejected this because prison gerrymandering is rooted in the same racist Jim Crow era, post-slavery era policies that have tried to diminish the political power of Black and Brown residents.
And Indigenous residents. This is a lot, we're talking about rural counties now there are large Indigenous populations out there too with our 27 tribes. And so it diminishes their voices too.
Yes. And, it did earn bipartisan support because this is something that the legislature time and time again has rejected. We just re-enfranchised about 77,000 formerly incarcerated Nevadans who have the right to vote as soon as they are no longer incarcerated. That is something that's the public policy of the state. So if we were to adopt maps based on an inaccurate count, it would just completely wipe out the purpose of ever passing any of this legislation.
And it skews the districts, in my opinion, completely.
Yes.
So, okay, I want to talk about overall process now. You've been doing a lot of this work behind the scenes leading up to the legislative or the special session that we just started today. So we're getting that corrected. We're on a good path with those numbers, making sure that that bill is being implemented correctly and making sure those people are being counted correctly. Next part of this, though, is the bigger picture with redistricting. We were talking about communities of interest earlier. I know this is something the ACLU cares about deeply as well, just like we do. Talk to me about the current proposed maps that were put out earlier this week. We'll put a link in the chat. I know the Republicans released some of their own versions today. I know other interest groups are putting out some of their own maps. What does this process look like going forward? And what do you think happens over the next couple of days?
So tomorrow is really going to be the most meaty day, the most sexy day. So tune in and watch what happens
all day long. We'll be covering
Assembly Bill 1, 10 a.m. hearing.
No, that was her today. Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 1.
Senate Bill 1. Sorry. Yes. Senate Bill 1, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Excuse me. That's going to be the really meaty bill where, they're talking about congressional districts. They're talking about, the maps are really impacting the communities of interest that we're focused on.
And really that's going to be the congressional districts statewide, the assembly districts statewide, and the state Senate districts statewide. So those are the ones, your representatives who go to Washington for you or here at the legislature representing you. So those are like the people who you vote for to go to Carson City or to DC to represent you.
So I think, you're going to see communities of interest come out and talk about problems with maps as they've been presented. It's going to be an interesting testimony for us because, we have to talk about both prison gerrymandering in a neutral space and then, probably talk about, the breaking up of the API community and the Latino community. So
and explain where the breakup, so there's two separate issues going on here. I want to explain those two separate issues. So where is the breakup of the Latino community happening currently? Which maps are being impacted by the breakup of the Latino community?
Right now, so there's a lot of focus on Congressional District 1. Prior to the release of these new maps, it was, I believe, 42% Latino makeup of Congressional District 1. There's always been a vision for that district to grow and to be a 50% plus one Latino district. That's what the community has wanted for Congressional District 1 for quite a long time. But what the maps do right now is it splits it off across 3 different congressional districts where there's 30% Latino vote. So we're missing that opportunity to really build up that political power of Latinos by the maps that have currently been proposed. So I know that, Silver State Voices and Nevadans Count Coalition has, submitted an alternative map that we think is suitable.
And that's coming soon.
Yeah, that's coming soon. And, to ensure. And so that becomes part of the process. We're asking the legislature to consider that and to consider that community of interest moving forward.
And redrawing maps during the session once the bill is heard is not unheard of. I mean, we did this in other areas. The school district is one of the places. They presented it, the community didn't like it, and they went back to the drawing board and shifted some of the lines. That can happen during this process.
Absolutely. And
so there's no excuse that, we can't go back to the drawing board. We can't redraw the lines. It's a bill now. We don't have to hear from the community, right?
That is correct. And that's what this entire process is for.
Yeah.
Any legislative process is open to the public. these individuals work for the public. We are the people who elect them and put them in those positions of power. And so it is ultimately the public who should come in and comment on issues that are impacting them.
So my next question is, let's talk about the API issues. I don't think those have been talked about quite as much as the issues with CD1. Where are those issues at? Which maps are those issues at? And what should people be watching for that?
Yeah. So early on, when the census data was released to the public, what we as an organization zeroed in on was the growth of the AAPI community. And we saw some opportunity there to increase political power among the AAPI voting bloc in Southern Nevada by creating a district that maybe gets to about 41%, 42% AAPI voters. That's sort of what we had zeroed in on. Because with that increase in that particular voting bloc, in the way that the current assembly districts are drawn, it would really dilute that political power by splitting it up. I think it was 20 in one district, 30 in one district, 27 in another district. Right now, the maps that have been proposed, they push up just a little bit. There is one assembly district that I think gets to 37.5%. But I think the legislature really needs to consider pushing that and drawing, in another precinct or two in order to, really ensure that that political power is recognized and realized in Southern Nevada.
So after this hearing tomorrow, which is happening at 10 a.m. in a joint committee, what will the next steps of the legislative process be? And where can people weigh in during those steps?
Yeah. So it will proceed through committee to committee vote, and then it will go back to the floor of the House of Origin. So the Senate bill will go back for a vote on the Senate floor. The Assembly will go back to a vote on the Assembly floor. And then that has to shift houses. But what's interesting about this process is that, in an effort to kind of expedite this special session, legislators have met in a joint committee. So that means that tomorrow really is your best opportunity to call in and comment and get your voice heard on the record. Otherwise, you have to submit information after the record, submit maybe something to the floor before it goes up for a vote or something like that.
But even while all of that is happening, even once it gets to the floor, I mean, you can still be doing social media. They watch Twitter. We know that. They watch Facebook. We know that.
They watch Out in Front with Annette.
They sure do watch this. And you should be sharing this on your social media. That is a great tool to make your voice heard. If you don't have time to call in, share our social media, share your own social media, tell your tweet at your legislators and tell them how you feel. We can help you find their Twitter handles or, their Facebook pages. We want you to weigh in with your legislators and tell them exactly how you feel on this. And if you have issues with a community of interest being split up or changed, you should make your voice heard right now. Now is the time. There is no more time to waste. You need to make your voice heard right now. So, from the ACLU's perspective, how do you think this process is going? And is it a fair process? I guess is my biggest question.
Yeah, I think there's a few problems because there's a strong likelihood that no matter what we're leaving here, and there's some legal challenge to these maps, the maps that they ultimately draw
from various parties.
It could be,
an actual party,
it could be us, it could be whomever. Might file a lawsuit and to challenge the maps. And, so this process really isn't finished after they pass these bills and the governor signs them. But, from my perspective, though, because there's the threat of lawsuits, it's not your typical lobbying structure. Everything's very hush hush. Nobody's really talking about what these maps look like. It's not
we're not going to see legislators on this out in front. Let me just tell you that it's going to be us talking to you about the process because they're not allowed to talk to us right now.
Yes. So it's very it's closed up. We don't have those open lines of communication. I mean, we've been able to have a few conversations, and in every conversation that we're having with lawmakers right now, it's happening in public. So what you're hearing in the legislative hearings, that's sort of the extent of what we're hearing from lawmakers too. So that's, uneasy, and it makes it really difficult to do our jobs. And then, there's people have gone back and forth that, the session was called this morning, and it doesn't, but like us, we all expected that, November would be the special session, but for the rest of the public, they're shocked to find out that, wow, they called it this morning and they're meeting in the afternoon. Don't they need time to prepare, et cetera? And so
We've
that gets
known this was
confusing.
coming.
Yeah, we as organizations and people involved in politics knew, but average folks, folks who do not work in this space, they don't, and they might have an interest in knowing that their lawmakers are convening in Carson City.
So another question from our audience that I just got, speaking of fairness, how do we make sure that the lines are drawn fairly? Like, what does that mean in this process? Because I think we keep saying we want a fair process, we want fair maps, we want these maps to be drawn fairly. All of these things keep getting said on Twitter. Mm-hmm. What does that actually mean in reality?
It means a lot of things. So you have constitutional requirements, that require, it's the principle of one person, one vote. So the legislature has to draw maps in a manner where they're pretty proportionate, pretty close in size to one another. So that's one, the kind of the number one thing that
and
we look
size,
at
like geographically, or number of people,
number of residents, number of people who reside in that particular district. And then you have communities of interest. So there's an area of law, the Voting Rights Act, called Section 2. We could probably do a whole segment on that one day, but that's where communities of interest come into play. There is law that protects communities of interest from being split up, if it diminishes the political power of that particular community. So there is, that consideration also. So splitting up a community of interest is would be an unfair map. We'd be creating unfair maps at that point. Then you have other issues of protecting incumbents. That's one thing that a lot of people talk about. A variety of different.
That's more partisan stuff that we're not worried about.
Yeah, like, and then then there's a variety of issues that you've got, all the partisan gerrymandering issues, all of those things that.
And I do want to say Nevada, both under Republican control, Democratic control, has fairly been not super gerrymandered based on what I've read and seen. We don't have a lot of gerrymandering going on in our processes. It's actually been a pretty fair process over the years.
Yeah,
from what
like
I've seen.
In 2011, the maps that the state ultimately ended up with weren't too different from the maps that actually passed.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few
like slight changes, shifts, but it was a fair process overall.
Yeah, I mean, a 3-judge panel ultimately decided, what those maps would look like. So and so I mean, I think that there is that process there, but that partisan fight is for them to hash out. For us, it's really about
keeping the communities of interest
together to as much as possible.
All right. Anything else you want the viewers to know? What do you think they need to know going into tomorrow? Tomorrow is going to be super important. We need you involved tomorrow. But what else do they need to know going through the next couple of days as we get through this process?
Just, have your voice heard. If you're curious about these things, follow Welbourne, follow our social media. We're at ACLUNV on all social media platforms. Follow along with Silver State Voices to keep updated on what we're doing. And of course, we do encourage you to watch these meetings and participate in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. We need your voices. Again, we can't just yell at them. We have to have you yell at them too if you want to see changes. This doesn't just happen with me, Holly, and Emily, contrary to popular belief. I don't have that much power. I mean, I do love yelling at them, but it's not just me that gets this done. And I know Holly feels the same way. So we need your voices. Your voices really matter in this process. And these maps are for you. These representatives work for you. You need to be a part of the process, regardless of your party. You need to be a part of the process because this really should be a nonpartisan session. And these should be nonpartisan conversations that we're having because this is more about communities and keeping communities together and keeping them whole. All right, Emily, anything you want to add to the conversation tonight?
Holly did a great job.
Holly did a great job. All right. So, couple of updates for you. We are going to be back out in front tomorrow. Not sure of the time, sometime in the evening. We will be starting at 10 a.m. tomorrow. That is when the joint committee of the Senate and Assembly will come back together in room 4100 in the building behind me in Carson City. My staff will be up and ready to rock and roll. All of our teams will be in there submitting map. We will be submitting different press stuff. We will be doing press, talking to press. We will be on social media. We will be doing all of the things we all during session. I need every single one of you following along, retweeting us, sharing our content. That is a really important thing. Making your voice heard on social media, talking to your legislators. We cannot do this without you. I cannot stress that enough. Follow along with all of our partners. That is another really great way to get the information. All of those partners I listed earlier, they are great resources for information, especially following along with groups in the APIA community like ACDC, and following along with our Latino groups, Make the Road and Mi Familia Vota. They're going to have a strong voice tomorrow. We really want to make sure those communities especially are heard, because the problems exist in those communities currently with these maps. So make sure you're contacting your legislators. That is the biggest thing you can do in the next 24 hours, and follow along with us tomorrow. We will be back out in front in Carson City tomorrow, where it all started, bringing you the latest and greatest from Carson City. If you have questions, bring us those questions. You can email us. You can hit us up on Twitter. Let us know your questions. We want to hear from you. So if there's things you don't understand about this process, let us know and we'll explain them tomorrow night. All right, we will see you tomorrow evening. Be safe, keep wearing your mask, and we will see you soon. Joining you live from Carson City. From all of us at PBP, thank you for joining us. And thank you from the worst person in Nevada. I thank you for joining me. Have a great evening, everyone. I hope you stay safe.